Lesson 78 is about opposites, and our key vocabulary word for this lesson is opposites. Now, in order to define opposites, we'll have some numbers written eventually, but a number line will be very helpful for you when you define this. Please pause the video now for a moment so you can draw out this number line. If we want to look at opposites, well, the opposite of 3 would have to be negative 3. Because it's an equal distance away from 0, but on the opposite side of the number line. So opposites, we could write 3 and negative 3. Another pair of opposites that we could have 6 and negative 6. They're opposites as well. If we looked at halves, we could say 4.5. Well, that's the opposite of negative 4.5. So whenever we have opposites, the only thing we're doing is changing the sign of the number. Let's go ahead and look at a couple problems that deal with opposites. Here we have to simplify, and we've got negative, 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 negative 7 with all these different symbols of inclusion. Now, every negative symbol is just means we're going to take the opposite. So, for example, if we were to have negative, negative 7. What that means is what is the opposite of negative 7? The opposite of negative 7? Well, that must be positive 7. So we can always think of negatives as opposites. Let's go ahead and work through this problem thinking of that. So we'll use a different color here. We've got negative 7. We want the opposite of negative 7. Well, that would make positive 7 if we were at this negative. Now, we want to take the opposite of positive 7. If we're at this negative, that's negative 7. Then we're going to take the opposite of negative 7. Well, that would be positive 7. And then we're going to take the opposite of positive 7. That must be negative 7. So we've got our answer. These problems are tricky as we go through, but if we look at something, we can find a pattern. Here we have two negatives. It makes a positive. And here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 negatives. That makes a negative. So whenever we have an even number of negatives, all right next to each other, that must give us a positive answer. And if we have an odd number of negatives all right next to each other in a row, that must give us a negative answer, as we saw right here. So you could always work with opposites like we did in the beginning, or you could remember this rule to help you just count and figure out if your answer will be positive or negative. Let's look at another example. We want to simplify. Well, what this is saying is the opposite of the opposite of the opposite of negative 6. Well, the opposite of negative 6 one time, this would be positive 6. The opposite of positive 6, that would be negative 6. And the opposite of negative 6 would have to be positive 6. We've got our answer. Now another way we could have done that, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 negatives in a row. 4 is an even number, so since we have an even number, we must have a positive answer. So we've got our number, 6, and it must be a positive. Just like we saw when we worked through talking about opposites, just using a little bit different logic as we think about it. Lesson practice will be on page 247. We'll work more with opposites then. Make sure you've got your notes completed, and I'll see you during our next class.